morning, today is March 9th, 2022, and today is a special edition of Morning Unchained. In this special edition, we'll be discussing some analysis of last weekend's ranked event by going over the top 100 cards' performance. Then we'll deep dive into some of the core set refresh cards and potential impact on the meta. All this to start your morning Unchained. More and more there have been discussions about the need to balance the game, but where should the developers really focus their energy? Today we will take a deep dive into the state of the meta by looking at the top 100 cards played during last weekend's ranked event. The data for this analytics comes from gudex.com card rankings. In this analysis we are only going to focus on cards played by players at mythic level, and were seen in over 1,000 matches during the 3-day event. Let's begin by talking about what the top 100 cards were spread out by domain. Nature does take over with 28 of its cards occupying the top 100 card slots. Death takes second place with 22 cards, then Magic and Neutral tie with 14 cards each, and War along with Deception take the last with 11 cards each. This is surprising given that there are only 40 cards in a deck, which means when players use Nature, they're using many of the same cards, which also means there isn't much variety in strategy, as most players have experienced. If you are a member of the Discord or Reddit community, you'll know many players call for Nature to be nerfed. When you see Nature having the most cards in the top 100, it is understandable to see why. But there is more to it than just the number of cards in top 100. After all, even if Nature has the most cards with high win rates, doesn't necessarily mean a lot of players are using Nature. For that reason, we also have to look at the number of matches a card was played during the weekend. To do this, you have to understand that only each domain can play with its own domain cards, which means if a deck played at least one Nature card, it must be from the Nature domain. Same for War, Magic, etc. Neutral cards can be used in any domain, so that wasn't included in this statistic. What I did was I took the first card from each domain with the most matches and figured out the percentage of times it appeared out of all matches compared to other domains' most played cards in the top 100. You need to do it this way because if you simply summed all the card matches, you'll end up finding domains with more cards in the top 100 will have larger summed values, which gives you a biased number. And by averaging, you can get skewed results because the expensive cards not being played as often as the less expensive cards. So this is the result. Magic got last with only 7,300 matches. Deception had 10,600 matches. Death had 12,300 matches. War had 13,500 matches. But Nature took first with, get this, 43,424 matches. That means approximately 50% of games by Mythic ranked players used Nature. No wonder people are tired of seeing Nature decks. But can we blame people for using Nature so much? 18 of the top 28 cards were from either Core or Divine Order, the two cheapest sets. Now then, another domain you may have heard about being too strong is Death. But from the statistics discussed so far, it doesn't appear Death is that much of a threat. The fact that only 14% of matches involve Death would probably leave many to wonder what the big deal is. Even the game developers do have their eyes on this domain, more so than Nature. So why? For that we need to look at a different metric. While it is true that Nature sees a lot of play, we really need to get back to focusing on actual win rates. Just because approximately half the matches involve Nature doesn't mean Nature's win rate is higher than that of Death cards. So what I did was I took the average win rate of each domain's cards in the top 100. This gives a more holistic view of the performance for each domain in terms of actually winning. If you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, you can see the chart shows Death clearly dominates with an average of 62% win rate. Neutral takes second with less than 56%, followed by War with about 54%. Nature, despite having the most cards in top 100, only has an average win rate of 53%, followed by Magic and Deception, both below 52. To further show the point, when looking at the top ranked cards, Death occupies 17 out of the top 20 cards. The only 3 cards in the top 20 not Death are neutral, and they are Jason, Medea's Muse, Demogorgon, and the Portable Fortress. This means that even though Death only takes up 22% of the top 100 card slots, it does take up 85% of the top 20 card slots. Suppose this shouldn't be too much of a surprise when we look at Mythic top tier decks and find that Board Wipe Death had a 67.9% win rate last weekend. Control War took second with 54%. Now, there is also another deck, Clone Magic, which does outpace Control War with the 56.8% win rate, but only if you include deck types with less than 1,000 matches, meaning Magic clone decks are very unpopular despite of its performance. So the next logical question would be, what can be done to damper the overwhelming win rate of Death Domain? After all, we know Board Wipe Death is overpowered. Then can't the developers fix it? Let's take a look at the top 3 cards of the domain, and, unsurprisingly the entire weekend, to answer that question. The top 3 cards last weekend were Apocalypse Now, Sulfuric Rain, and Siren of the Grave. Apocalypse Now is a 7-drop spell that says destroy all creatures again. This means cards that have Ward or summon a token with an afterlife are meaningless against the card's destructive effect. What's worse is that it only costs 7 mana, and Death already has creatures that unlock mana gems or can stall. And speaking of stalling, Sulfuric Rain and Siren of the Grave are an amazing combination. Siren of the Grave is a 1-drop 2/2 with War, obliterate a card in your hand, afterlife, all enemy creatures go to sleep. You can tell they try to balance this card by forcing the controller to obliterate a card when playing her. But with Sulfuric Rain, it's a moot point. Sulfuric Rain is a 1-drop spell that says each creature gets burn +2 and afterlife draw a card. So you play Siren of the Grave with Sulfuric Rain, then burn will kill Siren, making opponent's creatures go to sleep, and you recover the card you just lost. Plus, all your mana unlocking creatures will die too, giving you more card power and ensuring your mana wrap is successful for future turns. Lastly, it wipes away your opponent's creatures, making it a mini board wipe combo. Knowing this, what are our options? Well, when it comes to game balancing, there are 4 main strategies. Developers could try modding the cards like they do with core cards or new sets like Divine Order. But these 3 cards are all from the Genesis set, which was promised to never be modified nor re-released in future sets, so the developers are stuck with never changing these 3 powerful cards. The second potential strategy is to ban them from the game, or make them go, quote, unliving, like they have done with cards when they are too buggy for playing, for example, Pandora the Curious. For some context, Magic the Gathering started banning cards from the game after their 3rd release of new cards, and then after 7 sets introduced set rotation. However, Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't start banning cards until the 11th set release, and never introduced set rotation. So this solution isn't out of the question. It would impact the secondary market by further hurting investors in the game, but if it makes the game more enjoyable, it may be worth it in the long run. Another possible solution could be to change game mechanics to make these cards' effects less potent. While the promise was to never change the cards, they never promised that the game mechanic abilities would remain the same. They did attempt this with the Sleep 2.0 update in order to weaken Siren of the Grave and Demogorgon. However, it backfired as it also crippled Deception Domain. Lastly, they could design future cards that are more powerful or work around these cards. For example, release similar board wipe cards for other domains so they all have the same power level. Or release cards that add creatures to the hand so when an opponent plays Apocalypse Now, it isn't as devastating. This method seems to be the route they are taking with the new core set refresh, but we'll save that for future discussions. So speaking of banning sets, what if the problem isn't so much death cards as it is the Genesis set in general? Is that set overpowered and perhaps a complete set ban would be a solution? It very well may lead to that. Genesis does have more cards in the top 100 than other sets. While it is important to note that Genesis's average win rate is 58%, which is far less than Death Board Wipe Deck's win rate of 67%, it still has a higher win rate than Core, Order, and Trial. Meanwhile, Etherbots and Welcome sets can't be compared to Genesis since they both only have 1 card in the top 100. While the temptation is there to cycle out Genesis, the game's programming doesn't appear to be ready to handle different sets of legality since it still only has 1 ranked mode. However, fan-made tournaments have begun experimenting with banning complete sets from tournaments. So overall, if we were to take a look at average win rates by set and domain, Genesis Death is a clear winner. But to be fair, Trial Death and Core Death also take second and third. Genesis is pretty much the best set for all domains except Nature, who Genesis Nature ties with Trial of the Gods Nature for best average win rates. Same for Deception, where Trial Deception beats Genesis Deception. Again, we should ignore Welcome and Aetherbot sets since they only have one card each. So the last thing to cover today is the core set refresh that occurred on Monday. Out of the top 100 cards last weekend, there were 7 cards that were impacted by the core set refresh. In order of best performance to worst, the 7 cards were the Portable Fortress, End Times, Val Warden Minotaur, Lightning Strike, Hector, Prince of Troy, Vinebound Judun, and Shield Barrier. So let's discuss these in more detail. The Portable Fortress is a true drop neutral creature that has frontline and can't attack, and at the end of each turn, set its strength to 0. It's already a 0/8 Atlantean. Well, now it's going to be Magic Domain only. Its stats are changed to being a 1/6, and no longer has its attack reset at the end of each turn. It seems the changes to Portable Fortress is meant to support Magic decks by giving them exclusive access to the card. However, it is hard to tell if they made Portable Fortress better or worse, given that Portable Fortress was so good because it was an 8 health wall early game. But by having no attack, it also made it a giant punching bag. So it's nice that it has 1 attack now, although it is hard to think of a scenario where that makes a meaningful difference, since it still can't attack. End Times is the 8-drop death spell card that says destroy all creatures, then summon a 9/9 demonic skull with a -1/-1 for each enemy creature destroyed and +1/+1 for each friendly creature destroyed. Now the demonic skull is a steady 6/6 every time, which means End Times is still strong. Board Ripe Death did used to enjoy having a free skull monster that was usually an 8/8 or higher late game, since by that point the opponent would be struggling to summon more than one monster at a time. But it's still a 6/6. Fall Warden Minotaur is a 5-drop nature creature that's also 5/5 wild, and has an afterlife which says heal your god for 4. If this completely heals your god, add a random nature card to your hand. Well, they changed its afterlife to now say heal your god for 3 and add a random 7 mana cost creature to your hand. This means Val Warden Minotaur is far superior now than what it used to be. It already placed top 62 last weekend, but we should expect to see it place much higher now in the future. It basically gives nature a solution to board-ripe death decks by having a powerful floater, and it heals them. Will it be enough for nature to finally overtake the deck? Most likely no, but it is a step in the right direction. Lightning Strike is a 3-drop nature spell that says deal 8 damage to a random enemy creature and give it burn +2. Its new effect will now deal 6 damage to the strongest enemy creature. This means Lightning Strike is much weaker now against some decks and stronger against others. Decks like Light and Magic, who typically have few but big creatures, are given much more advantage, whereas War and Deception, who usually buff a single creature while swarming, will not be able to hide among the swarm. This is why nature will always struggle to be number 1 in Mythic, because they cannot ever target the true threat like death or magic can specifically target. Everything in nature is always big, heavy, and seemingly random. Hector, Prince of Troy is a 7-drop war creature that says War. If any creature in your void has Blitz, Flank, Frontline, Leech, Protected, Twin Strike, or Ward, this creature gains those abilities. And it's a 6/6 Olympian. They changed it so now that its stats are 7/7, and its war ability says if any creatures in your void have Blitz, Protected, Twin Strike, or Ward, this creature gains those. While Prince of Troy did gain +1/+1, it still feels worse. He was only ranked top 83 last weekend, and granted he is now a 7/7, so that is nice, but without gaining Frontline or Leech, it makes people wonder how much of an impact that this will have on his performance. Vinebound Judun is a 8-drop nature creature with Overkill and War, deal 3 damage to each other creature, and it's a 10/12. The only change is that now it's a wild creature type. Finebound Junton being changed into a wild was just to help with nature synergy. A lot of cards in the core set now involve wild creatures, but most of them seem to interact with 7 mana drops, not 8. So we'll have to wait and see how much of an impact this really has on the card's performance. And lastly, Shield Barrier, the 1-drop neutral creature that was a 0/1 Olympian that says War, give +1/+1 to a friendly creature. It is now light domain only. The reason behind changing Shield Barrier into light domain is likely the same reason behind changing Portable Fortress into the magic domain. However, unlike Portable Fortress, it only got to top 97 and only saw 1700 matches. Divide that by 6, since it's no longer neutral, it's not likely to see much play in the mythic ranks. Now, they may have changed this to help with the lower tier ranks, matches that are not involving mythic players, but we'll see where this goes. So what do you all think about these changes? There are many comments to make about the new core refresh, so discussing just these 7 cards only scratches the surface. It doesn't look like it will do much to slow down board wipe death, but it may help nature further solidify the cards in the top 100. There was one more tidbit of realization I learned from observing the data this closely. Did you notice it as well? At first, I didn't think much of it, because the data results came back showing me data for 6 domains. And there are only 6 different gods: nature, death, war, magic, deception, and light. That's when it dawned on me. That's right, there are no light. Light domain didn't have a single card make it to the top 100 list. The reason why is because if we go back to look at the top decks, the first light deck is Aggro Light with 48.2% win rate. But the worst performing card in the top 100 list had a 49.8% win rate, which means none of Light's cards could beat the worst card on the list. A sad story for Light players indeed, but with so many changes coming to the core refresh, let's see what happens in a few weeks when players have readjusted to the new effects. Maybe a new Light deck will emerge and bring balance to the domains again. And that is it for this special edition of Morning Unchained. Thank you for joining. You can find more content on YouTube, Rumble, and Spotify. If you appreciate these morning updates, please subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening, and share this with all your friends. See you all in the next update.